Luxury hotels and limo rides, all paid for by taxpayers. A scathing report from the Chicago Public Schools Inspector General questions millions of dollars spent on travel by city educators.
So on this channel, I covered the supermayor a lot. Her crazy antics, her wild spending, and of course, all the different various controversies that she stumbled into, and the crazy way that she responded to the criticism, or false allegations as she called it.
False allegations and not facts.
But I think there's one thing that I did not emphasize enough during the course of those videos, which is how much of the supermayor's behavior is actually completely normal for the state of Illinois, for Cook County, for any politician that happens to be a Democrat living around the Chicago area. Because recently, there was a report that is not getting anywhere near the attention that it deserves about Chicago public schools. And in this report, what we ultimately ended up discovering is that the teachers union has decided that they are going to participate in supermayor-style corruption. And of course, this is stealing your tax dollars in order to travel to all these different luxurious places, first class, of course, taking limo rides to the airport, of course, all disguised, and sometimes not even disguised, as educational development trips. And this is all happening at the same time that the city of Chicago is facing a massive budget deficit, that Brendan Johnson, who is a member of that teachers union, who again did not resign from his position, he's actually on leave, and he's trying to give more money to this organization. He's actually trying to borrow basically the equivalent of a government payday loan in order to do so. And yeah, they're not good stewards of your taxpayer dollars, and this report that came out last week proves the truth of that. So this is what we're going to talk about today, this massive teachers union corruption, how it ties into Biden era COVID spending, and how not despite the fact that they're this corrupt, but because the fact that they're this corrupt, they are still Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago's #1 priority in order to shovel more money to, because he is the beneficiary of that corruption. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Good morning, Marie. Well, investigators say this all began with a complaint about a $20,000 staff trip to Egypt that was never approved. The CPS Inspector General didn't mince words in his report, calling much of what you're about to hear travel abuse.
So the local news report that I highlighted opened up by talking about this $20,000 trip to Egypt that members of the Chicago Public Schools were going to go on as some kind of education development. That was the ruse that they were operating under, and how that trip was canceled amid suspicion. And this ended up leading to an investigation by the city comptroller into the massive amounts of travel corruption that we are seeing in Chicago public schools. But even though this trip, the Egypt one, did not happen, it's important for you guys to understand what was on the itinerary for this very much education-driven trip that was supposed to develop the talent of Chicago public school teachers. They were going to do things that will help your kids learn, like go on camel rides, go on a tour of the pyramids, stay in luxury hotels, among many, many other vacation things, education development things that they wanted to be paid for by the Chicago taxpayers, while at the same time they have an over $1 billion budget deficit. 700+ million of that is just in the Chicago public school system. But it gets worse than that, because while that trip ended up being the thing that sparked this investigation, and it was ultimately canceled last minute due to the fact that there was so much outrage, there were actually many more trips that Chicago public school officials charged to the taxpayer that they did go on, and they're just as absurd, just as ridiculous as the one that they didn't go on. So as you can see right here, and this comes directly from the office of the Inspector General, they went to a whole bunch of different countries on the taxpayer dime. According to the OIG investigation, they found that 8 schools had used more than $142,000 in CPS funds, that's Chicago Public School funds, if you guys are unaware, to pay this vendor for 15 staff trips to Finland, Estonia, Egypt, and South Africa for professional development and school visits. These tours also featured numerous scheduled as well as optional tourist activities of debatable value, including a South African game park, hot air balloon ride, the camel rides that we talked about the Egypt trip, and a visit to a bizarre. There was also a pyramid tour in there. 13 of the 15 trips were never pre-approved as required. And a high-ranking CPS official later questioned whether these trips were actually necessary and actually asked the OIG, why can't these be done in the United States? The official then began to scrutinize such trips more carefully.
Some examples: an educator spent $945 a night on a hotel for a Las Vegas conference booked last minute.
So look, I'm gonna link this local news segment in the description of this video so you can check it out for yourself, but it's important to understand that they give you a very distilled version of the story. They don't cover all the different aspects of it, and a perfect example of this is them highlighting the $945 per night spent on hotel rooms on this Vegas trip, but not telling you that the plane tickets actually cost $1,000 per person because they were booked last minute in order to go to this conference. And again, part of the reason why they're booking these trips last minute is due to the fact that there's almost no oversight and you can get away with it, but you have all these funds that are associated for educational development in Chicago public schools that they're basically spending because they're hoping that if they go on the trip, have a great time, enjoy themselves, that they can have that fun before anybody finds out about it. So a lot of these trips not only are just luxury and absurd luxuries for the Chicago public school officials, but in addition to that, they're booking them last minute because they're so careless with your tax dollars. It's absolute madness. Also left out of this segment is how widespread specifically the Vegas conferences became in Chicago public schools, because once it was out that you could get a free taxpayer funded trip and a luxury hotel in Las Vegas under the guise of education development, 600 Chicago public school employees ended up taking up this offer and going on these trips. And they worked at 140 different schools, and the total cost of these unnecessary trips over the course of 2 years was $1.5 million. $1.5 million for luxury taxpayer funded vacations in Las Vegas. Oh, and by the way, it's going to get worse because we got to go over the overall totals because those are insane too. And I also want to give you some overall context on this particular story that I think will also be helpful to you guys out there in the audience, and that is the travel budget for Chicago public schools. And again, this is both national and international travel. Why these teachers need to go international, who the hell knows? Why the taxpayer has to pay for it, who the hell knows? But during the Biden era COVID stimulus period, we actually saw travel spending, both national and international, by Chicago public schools go up to $7+ million, which is more than double what it was pre the COVID infusion of funds. And if you guys don't remember, there was about $180 billion allocated to save the public schools in that Biden relief bill. And this is how the city of Chicago was spending the money. And what makes this significantly worse, what makes this significantly more disgusting, is that the Chicago Public Teachers Union, probably more than any other union in the entire country, was the one that was fighting the hardest to not have their teachers go back to school because it was unsafe for their union members to be in classrooms with your kid because they were going to get COVID and obviously die. And even though they were pushing the vaccine, even after the vaccine, they were also fighting against having their teachers actually go to work and teach your children. So at the same time that they're refusing to educate the children in Chicago public schools, they're traveling around the world on luxury trips that are thinly disguised, if even attempted to be thinly disguised, vacations, because this is how little they care about your children. Remember, the point of public education is to help the people who work in public education, not the students in those public schools.
A professional development trip to South Africa included a wildlife tour that didn't appear to have any educational value.
So again, while the Chicago public school officials don't have the presence of the super mayor, they're not out there and in your face dropping rap songs like her, make no mistake about it, the state of Illinois has the most public officials that have gone to prison for corruption for a reason, and that is because the corruption is in every aspect of their government. I mean, come on. They're going to South Africa and on an education development trip, and during the course of said trip, They're going on a wildlife safari. Like, are we serious? They're actually dressing up in this goofy ass outfit to go see the animals in South Africa, and they're pretending that that is a necessary taxpayer funded expense. And again, I will add that this comes from the COVID funds, a lot of it from the Biden administration that came with very little oversight. So they're just defrauding the federal taxpayer. It's not just the taxpayer in the city of Chicago that's being screwed over, but at the same time, they received like $1.8 billion in those funds, and the entire budget deficit for the city of Chicago going into next year is less than the money that was funneled to Chicago public schools for them to spend on frivolous things like vacations while they were refusing to educate your children.
And a principal racked up thousands of dollars in bills going to 7 out-of-state conferences in 2 years.
And of course, we have a principal racking up thousands of dollars going to conferences that are completely excessive and unnecessary, because guess what? It's not like education outcomes got better in Chicago. They got significantly worse due to the actions of the teachers union.
Investigators also found that some people charged CPS for limo rides to the airport. Others would attend conferences in places like Las Vegas or Disney World, but not attend similar events held in Chicago.
I mean, guys, come on. They were going to conferences, supposed education conferences in places like Las Vegas, and by the way, went on trips to Disney World in order to learn things. This is very reminiscent of that New York story where the New York public school system was caught using funding that was meant to help the poorest kids in the city of New York to go on Disney trips with the staffers and the staffers' children, not the children that they were supposed to help. And they're all pretending this is an education thing. However, if there's a similar type conference, sometimes a conference put on by the same organization in the city of Chicago, they can't be bothered to attend it. This is such a ridiculous example of corruption. And again, it is not surprising that it's in the state of Illinois, not surprising that it's in the city of Chicago, and it's not surprising that it's coming from the Chicago public school systems, because guess what? Corruption is what they do. And again, at the same time that all of this is going on, they're talking about how they need more money from Springfield, from the capital. They need more money from the city. They need to raise property taxes, tax corporations with an employee tax, tax social media, and all the crazy things that Brandon Johnson is advocating for in order to get these teachers paid, because, oh my God, the system is going to fall apart. But this is how they use the money that they receive. Again, limo rides, it's not even like you're doing the luxurious Uber rides to the airport. You have to call a limo service. You have to be that ridiculous with the taxpayer purse. But of course they do, because nobody's watching the store.
The Inspector General's team says CPS's review of travel requests focused too much on proper paperwork instead of analyzing if a trip was worth the cost. The report called that CPS travel expense process broken and its bookkeeping deficient. Investigators discovered records were being kept on 7 different databases that couldn't easily be linked. They also found CPS had no written spending limits on international trips and that travel agencies had no budget restrictions.
So this is just straight up a blatant example of corruption. You do not have a system where you're scattering all the documents on multiple databases if you want people to be able to find and examine those documents. You do not allow your agencies to have no restrictions on international travel and no budget at all whatsoever for your trips if you actually intend to care about the taxpayer purse. This was designed this way. This is the intended outcome. It is not an accident. And again, once they got their boy, Brandon Johnson, in the mayor's office, this thing went completely off the rails. The corruption absolutely exploded. And again, this is all happening while Chicago Public Schools specifically has something like a $700 million budget deficit, and the city of Chicago's budget deficit is north of $1 billion. So when Brandon Johnson is coming to the public hat in hand saying that he needs more tax money for this, that, and the other, remember, he is trying to fund this corruption. And by the way, it is so obvious at this point in time that he's being called out by the local news media for his scams in the Chicago budget to his face, which, by the way, is absolutely hilarious.
The mayor also defending his plan to sweep $1 billion in TIF funds, more than half of which would go to Chicago Public Schools.
What do you say to those who might see this as a budget for CPS, a reward for your allies?
A TIF surplus goes to our city colleges. It goes to our parks. goes to our libraries.
But the
The
majority
tip
goes to
surpluses-
CPS.
Well, because that's the way the law is designed.
Right.
And so investing in CPS, that's a good thing, right?
Now, of course, with all this attention on Chicago public schools, and as we've talked about, there's a lot of backlash from Black residents in the city of Chicago specifically, as they had their properties assessed recently for property taxes and saw ridiculous increases in the very communities that Brandon Johnson always claims that he's advocating for. Chicago Public Schools was forced to respond to this report about their frivolous spending, and their response, again, ridiculous. I gotta play it for you because obviously it is so counter to reality. It's egregious that they even thought they can get away with a lie like this.
CPS statement released this morning says that the district is committed to fiscal responsibility. That's a direct quote. A travel effect is now in effect for most a travel freeze, is now in effect for most employees. And Marie, CPS, says it is looking into possible disciplinary action for some of those staffers involved.
Yeah, that's right. Chicago Public Schools released a statement saying, hey, we're committed to fiscal responsibility. At the same time that over half of the city's budget deficit comes from Chicago Public Schools, at the same time that we discover that they're doing anything but that, it's essentially the equivalent of saying that Jeffrey Epstein released a statement about how he was committed to the well-being and sanctity of minors. Like, it's insane. It's ridiculous. But again, this should not be surprising to anyone. And now, of course, that they got caught, they said that they're going to institute a freeze and maybe, just maybe, there'll be some disciplinary action. But the fact is, certain people that work there are members of the Chicago Teachers Union. And guess what? They're not going to face any legitimate disciplinary action because it's basically impossible to fire a teacher in the teachers union in these left-wing areas, and that is by design. Again, corruption is built into the system. This is why Brandon Johnson is trying to give them even more money, even though enrollment of students is down. They have a bunch of schools that they should consolidate. They refuse to do so because guess what? The whole point of public schools in the United States of America is to help the people who work in the public schools. Get that through your head. It has nothing to do with the children. That is a PR thing when they start advertising about how they're trying to cut education to your kids. In reality, they're worried about their luxury trip, their Egyptian safari, their tour of the pyramids, their camel rides being stripped away from them. And make no mistake about it, as soon as you stop watching, they're going to go right back to those limo rides to the airport. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about madness in the city of Chicago's budget. Till next time.